So these numbers are certainly very alarming, particularly when it comes to the red states, which may well hamper the efforts to have Donald Trump re-elected.
That's right, Peter. I mean, what we're seeing now in the early stages of the pandemic, of course, was that the Democrat cities and the Democrat states were hit hardest. Now we're seeing the Republican states, Florida, Georgia, Texas, Arizona, being hit incredibly hard. I mean, 15,000 infections in Florida yesterday alone, 12,500 today. These are astonishing figures. And the great question here is, to what degree will this harm Trump's chances of re-election? The death rate is much lower than it was earlier in the pandemic, but this is going to slow down the economic recovery in those states, which of course will hurt the president as well. So we're really at an incredible moment here, I think, when we're just going to have to see how this plays out of these very, very large-scale infections all over the country.
There's only so much, authorities can do, though, isn't there, Cam? I mean, you had that instance, and let me know what you think about this. You're living in the States, when you had the restrictions, the tough restrictions that were in place, but then they started to ease somewhat, but then people got tired. People got bored of being locked up, didn't they? And so they just went out and did their own thing, and now they're kind of paying for it.
Yeah, that's right, Pete. Really, the country is just fed up with being cooped up. I mean, that's really the best way to put it. I've travelled in the last couple of weeks around Massachusetts, Connecticut, upstate New York. There's a lot of people that don't wear masks. And they're in areas where the pandemic at the moment is not as bad because it came through earlier on rather than now. They're not really wearing masks that much. There's not a lot of social distancing. People are very uneven. And you would have seen those pictures in Florida. There's parties going on all the time. And what you're seeing is the infections that are coming through, this new batch of infections, are overwhelmingly among young people. And I think that just shows that this sort of cooped up mentality is really wearing thin on lots of Americans, and that's why you're seeing such a resurgence.
And that can't exactly be Donald Trump's fault, can it? I mean, there's only so much he can do, right?
Look, yeah, the thing about this, I think, is that there's blame shared all the way through here. I think the president has had a very uneven management of this pandemic, but so have the mayors, the city mayors, and so have a lot of the governors. It's a very weak patchwork of federal system here in the US, and it's just not well suited to dealing with the pandemic like this. And so, look, I think there's a bit of blame to be shared everywhere, but what we're seeing is remarkable right now because California has just announced in the last hour that they are closing restaurants, bars, and even schools in the opening of the fall season. So that's pretty major.
Yeah, and that's and that has been a continuing theme in recent days, doesn't it? When the president, because he's wanted the kids back in school, right? Can you let me know about that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly Donald Trump wants kids back at school. I mean, everyone wants kids back at school. Let's face it, I want our kid back at school. I've got an 11-year-old boy here. But the bottom line is it safe? A lot of debate about that. Of course, in the northeastern area where I'm living at the moment, it's not quite as bad. The schools probably will be reopened in a hybrid way, maybe 2 days a week. But this is really important for Donald Trump to get people going back to school. But what's happening now is in these areas where the virus is surging, teachers are scared to go back and parents are scared to send their kids back. So it's a very open and very live debate here at the moment, exactly what's going to happen when schools open in late August.
Okay, and meanwhile, Trump still does believe that the Republican convention will still go ahead?
Yeah, he said today that he believes something big and good will happen. He wasn't specific about it. Jacksonville, of course, is in the northern part of Florida, very hard hit by the virus, and a lot of thinking basically that you can't have a big crowd in the stadium. It's not going to happen the way Donald Trump wants, but he wants at least some people there. So it's a very fast-moving debate. I think it will happen in Jacksonville to some degree, but it won't be the remote convention that the Democrats are holding in Milwaukee. They will be much more cautious about this, I think.
So what's their plans? What's the Democrats what's their plans with all of that?
Well, they've asked the delegates actually not to come to their convention in Milwaukee. So Joe Biden will accept the nomination on stage with a very small crowd, about 1,000 people, and he'll accept it and make his speech. That's the plan at the moment. And apart from that, there is nothing else happening in Milwaukee, which is extraordinary for American politics. These are such fabulous circuses and theatre moments in the American election campaign.
You'd have to think that would be a bit of a blow for Joe Biden's ego. It's a big moment for him to accept the nomination from the party, and there's maybe 1,000 people there.
Absolutely. It's a great frustration for journalists too, Pete.
Yeah. Now on to foreign diplomacy. Well, the stoush between the US and China continues. Now it relates to China's claim in the South China Sea. What's the latest there?
Yeah, interesting development today. The Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, has formally declared the US position is that China's claims to these disputed territories in the South China Sea is illegal. Now, that's a step forward and a hard line from the US. Their previous position was a much more neutral one, to say let the UN try to sort it out. Now they've said these claims are illegal. Now, this is part of Donald Trump's attempt to put pressure on Beijing. Of course, tensions between the two countries are very high at the moment. The Americans sent some aircraft carriers in there earlier this month into the South China Sea. But this is a real statement from the US, and I think you'll find in the next couple of hours, Pete, we'll have a strong reaction from Beijing.
Yeah, OK. We'll see what our government has to say about that as well. And just finally, we just had a report on our show a short time ago, Cam, that the Washington Redskins, very famous brand, is now changing its brand.
That's right, Pete. Everything's changing in Washington. This has been a debate for many years in Washington, but it's a big shock to people who live in the city, of course. That's an 80-year-old brand, the Washington Redskins, very famous. But in the post-George Floyd era, it's considered that it was just too offensive or too risky for the team to continue. Very interesting, though. It was basically forced on the owner of the team by the corporate sponsors, who all said they would not sponsor the team anymore if they were called the Redskins. Yet 4 years ago, interestingly, there was a poll taken of Native Americans where 9 out of 10 said they didn't mind the term. So it's just really interesting how these things are unfolding in the US, and it's very controversial as well.
Well, I guess when you've got brands like Amazon, these big multi-billion-dollar brands that are saying, well, we might pull our money, then money talks, I guess. And what's it going to be? The Red Tails and the what's the other name that came up a little bit earlier? I've forgotten it.
Oh, there's a bunch of them. The Warriors, there's a whole bunch of them, and you can guarantee whatever they choose, people are going to hate, because it takes a long time to get used to these names.
Yeah, exactly.